he saw her holding his son, and within minutes, she was out of a job. No discussion, no explanation. One order from his mouth, and the woman who had worked in his house for months was standing outside in the cold, humiliated and confused. To James Whitmore, a self-made millionaire with a spotless reputation, the scene was clear as day. The maid had crossed a line. In his world, there was no room for mistakes when it came to his 6-year-old boy. But what James didn't know was that a silent witness had seen everything. It didn't just capture what happened in that living room. It recorded every second, every sound, every truth he had missed. And when James finally pressed play, he realized firing her was the biggest mistake of his life. James Whitmore had built his empire brick by brick, from a cramped apartment with a leaky roof to a sprawling glass-walled estate that overlooked the Houston skyline. Every inch of it was a reminder of how far he'd come. The mansion was immaculate, almost unnervingly so. White marble floors polished to a mirror finish, a grand piano in the corner of the living room that no one played. Everything in its place, everything silent except for the sound of a boy's small footsteps. Ethan, 6 years old, James' only child and, in his eyes, his only true treasure? A quiet, shy boy with big brown eyes who rarely let anyone get close. Since his mother's passing 2 years ago, Ethan's world had grown smaller, safer, and lonelier. To keep things running smoothly, James hired help, gardeners, a private chef, and, most recently, a maid, Rosa Alvarez, 45, Latina, soft-spoken, with hands that looked like they'd spent a lifetime working. She moved through the house with the kind of care most people reserved for sacred places. James didn't know much about her life outside of work. He didn't ask. In his mind, she was there to clean, to keep order, nothing more. But Ethan liked her. It was subtle at first, a longer smile when she brought in his favorite snack, the way he'd follow her to the kitchen to help, even when no one asked him to. James noticed it, and though he never admitted, part of him didn't like it. It happened on a Tuesday. James had left an important meeting early, his mind already occupied with numbers, contracts, and deadlines. He walked into the house expecting silence, the usual hum of a well-ordered home. Instead, he found in the doorway of the living room. Rosa was there, holding Ethan in her arms. The boy's small face was buried in her shoulder, and Rosa's expression was tight, almost pain. Her hand was on the back of his head, whispering something James couldn't hear. In James' world, there were rules, boundaries, and in that moment, every alarm in his mind went off at once. "What do you think you're doing?" His voice came out sharp, almost a bark. Rosa turned, startled. "Sir Whitmore." "Don't," he snapped, stepping forward. "Put him down, now." Ethan clung tighter, his small hands gripping Rosa's sweater. "Dead, Jay." Not another word. James cut him off. He could feel the heat rising in his chest. He didn't care what excuse she had in his mind. The line had been crossed. "You're done here," he said flatly. Her mouth opened like she might protest, but she closed it again. A long, silent moment hung between them before Rosa nodded once and slowly set Ethan on the couch. Without another word, she picked up her bag and walked toward the front door. James didn't watch her leave. He didn't need to. As far as he was concerned, it was handled. The front door clicked shut, and the silence that followed felt heavier than usual. James stood in the middle of the living room, jaw tight, staring at the empty space where Rosa had just been. Ethan Saturday on the couch, small hands twisted together in his lap. He wasn't crying, not exactly, but his eyes were wide, hurt, and confused. "Finish your homework," James said, his voice clipped. He didn't wait for a reply before heading into his office. The rest of the evening was quiet, too quiet. Ethan barely touched his dinner, pushing peas around his plate until James told him to go to bed. Later, James' sister Margaret stopped by to drop off some paperwork. She noticed immediately, "What's with the mood in here?" James shrugged. "I fired the maid." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Why?" She was holding Ethan in the living room. "I told her not to get too familiar." Margaret's brow furrowed. "And that's it? You didn't ask why?" "I didn't need to," James replied firmly, "I know what I saw." Margaret didn't argue, but her expression lingered in his mind long after she left. That night, as James lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the scene replayed over and over. The look on Rosa's face, the way Ethan had clung to her. Something about it didn't sit right, but it pushed the thought away. Morning, James was back in his routine: coffee, emails, and a stack of financial reports. But every so often, his mind wandered to the living room scene. The way Ethan had held on to Rosa. The way she hadn't said a word in her own defense. It was when he went to grab his laptop bag from the counter that his eyes landed on the small black lens above the mantelpiece. The security camera. He had installed it months ago, more for insurance than anything else. Now, it felt like a doorway to answers. James sat down at his desk, opened the camera app, and began scrolling through yesterday's footage. It took a few minutes to find the exact moment he'd walked in, and there it was. From his angle yesterday, he'd only seen Rosa holding Ethan. From the camera's angle, it told a completely different story. Ethan was sitting cross-legged on the floor, unwrapping a small candy. One second he was smiling, the next coughing hard, panic flashing across his face. He clutched at his throat, eyes wide. Rosa was beside him in an instant. She dropped to her knees, arms around him, performing the Heimlich maneuver with quick, practiced motions. After a few 10 seconds, the candy popped out, bouncing across the hardwood floor. Ethan gasped for air, tears streaking his cheeks. And that was when he'd wrapped his arms around her neck, burying his face into her shoulder. Not out of defiance. Not out of anything inappropriate. Out of relief, out of gratitude. James sat frowning, his stomach sinking as the reality hit him. He hadn't walked in on some breach of trust. He'd walked in moments after Rosa had saved his son's life. James replayed the footage. Once, twice, a third time, slower, as if each frame could somehow undo the words he'd thrown at her. Every detail cut deeper: the urgency in Rosa's movements, the fear in Ethan's eyes, the way she didn't panic for even a second. She'd acted faster than he probably would have himself. And instead of thanking her, he'd thrown her out like a criminal. His chest tightened. He thought about all the little moments he'd brushed off: Ethan lingering in the kitchen when Rosa was cooking, the quiet giggles when she taught him a Spanish word, the way his son had actually eaten vegetables when she served them. They weren't signs of overstepping, they were signs of trust, signs Ethan didn't give easily, not since his mother had died. James leaned back in his chair, pressing his hands over his face. It wasn't just about Rosa anymore. It was about the fact that Ethan had tried to speak up that day, and James had shut him down without listening. He'd been so certain, so quick to judge, that he hadn't even considered he might be wrong. And now, the image of Rosa walking out of his house in silence burned in his mind like a brand. There was only one thing left to do. By late afternoon, James was in his car, driving through streets he rarely visited. The manicured lawns of his gated community gave way to cracked sidewalks, faded paint, and apartment buildings that had seen better days. He found Rosa's address and parked outside a modest, weathered brick complex. The hallway smelled faintly of cooking spices and laundry soap. When he knocked, there was a long pause before the door opened just a crack. Rosa's eyes met his, cautious and unreadable. "Sir Whitmore," she said slowly, as if unsure why he was there. "I came to apologize," James began, the words feeling heavier than he expected. "I saw the footage. I know what really happened." For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she opened the door wider, but didn't step aside to let him in. "You think an apology changes what you did?" she asked, her voice calm but sharp. James swallowed hard. "No, I know it doesn't, but I was wrong. I didn't listen to you or to him, and I can't fix that unless you give me a chance." Her gaze softened slightly, but only slightly. "Ethan thought you didn't believe him," she said quietly. "Do you know how that feels for a child?" The words landed like a blow. He shook his head. "I know now, and I don't want him to grow up thinking I can't trust the people who care about him." There was a long silence before James added, "I need you to come back, not for me, for him." Rosa studied him for what felt like a full minute. Finally, she nodded once. "I'll come back, but only if you promise to trust me completely. No more quick judgments, no more walls between us." James didn't hesitate. "You have my word." The next morning, James stood in the doorway of the living room, watching as Ethan's small footsteps echoed across the marble floor. The moment he saw Rosa, the boy broke into a run. She dropped to one knee, arms open, and Ethan collided into her hug with the kind of force that only comes from relief. He buried his face into her shoulder, the same way he had on that day, only this time, James understood exactly why. Rosa whispered something to him in Spanish, and his laughter filled the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. James just stood there, humbled. He realized something then: money could buy a house, a car, a down-seen walls of glass, but it couldn't buy trust. It couldn't buy the look on his son's face right now. Later that evening, when the house had settled into its quiet rhythm, James found himself glancing at the camera above the mantel. It had recorded the worst and best moments of the past week, and as he thought about it, one truth stayed with him. Sometimes what you think you see isn't the truth at all. Sometimes you need to look closer, listen harder, and believe the people who've earned it. He smiled faintly, watching from the kitchen, as Ethan and Rosa set the dinner table together. In the end, James thought, the camera didn't just show me what happened, it showed me the kind of man I still had time to become.